Good afternoon and welcome again to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I am Wright, Chairman of the CMC Board of Trustees and also President of Raymond Consulting. Thank you all for being here this afternoon for today's conversation. Today's forum, Keeping the Lights On, is brought to us with support from Columbia Gas of Ohio and in partnership with the OSU Office of Energy and Environment. Our entire series entitled Fueling Ohio's Future is brought to us by series sponsors American Electric Power. Let's thank these sponsors for their ongoing support of Columbus Metropolitan Club. Because electric utilities provide essential services for the well-being of our society to both individuals and to businesses, the government intervenes in the form of regulation. Regulations exist to ensure that the system is reliable, that it's safe, and that it's fairly administered. Changes in the regulatory environment are having a profound effect on the historic stability of the market, from power generation to infrastructure, ultimately to the price we pay to keep our lights on. It's a complicated mix of business, of government, of market forces, and for some enlightenment, we turn to today's panel. Please join me in welcoming, first, the Chair of the Ohio Consumers Council, Gene Krebs, the President and Chief Operating Officer of American Electric Power, Pablo, economist and professor at the John Glenn School of College now of Public Affairs. I'm an alum, so I should have gotten that right. Ned Hill, partner with McNees, Wallace, and Nurick, Sam Randazzo, and moderating today's forum from the Ohio State House News Bureau, Mr. Andy Chow. Andy, the podium's yours.
All right, thank you, Mo, and thank all of you at the Columbus Metropolitan Club for having us here. It's always great to participate in these discussions, especially important issues like the one we're here to talk about today. And when it comes to important things happening in the state of Ohio, this issue comes very nearly to the top of the list. Because we're all affected in many ways by what's happening in the energy industry. We might not know it when you hear utility regulation. You might not think, that's not for me, but as the title of the event says, we all want to keep the lights on. But this is something that can also have a direct and even visceral connection with us as well, because we all know how it feels to walk out to the mailbox, opening up your envelope and seeing that electric bill, or logging onto your account and seeing your monthly statement. What we're talking about here today, partially, is a Public Utilities Commission of Ohio proposal and what that brings and the many, many doors that it opens and the many topics that it opens. And in the plainest terms, that case is asking, what will our monthly electric bill look like in the next 8 years? Will we see additional fees? And/or are we going to see the price of energy costs in general go up? And above all else, what are the factors? Why is this happening? And we're also going to hear about coal. And Ohio is a coal state. And for decades upon decades, it's been a coal state and it has a strong history here in Ohio. And we're familiar with regulations coming from the government, but there's also new things happening in the market that are impacting coal here in Ohio. So the official term in that PUCO case is called the Power Purchase Agreement, but opponents are calling it a coal plant bailout. Proponents say that this will save jobs, ensure a reliable grid, making sure the lights don't turn off, and it will make sure it stabilizes costs. So I want to urge, that's very, very simple. That's a very simple way of putting a very complex issue. So we're going to also talk about natural gas. We're going to talk about renewable energy. We're going to talk about competition in the market. So let's get right into it and send it over to Pablo first. Pablo, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about some of the themes that are coming out of this case and what we're seeing in energy in Ohio.
Great. Thank you very much, Andy. And thank you, everybody, for including me in this conversation. It is interesting. It's how many times in our lifetime can you remember having a conversation about energy issues and regulation being an exciting topic? It's a first for me. You know, it's refreshing to actually people go, wow, there's really some interesting things going on in your industry. It's like, yeah, there really is. There's a lot of interesting things going on. So this case that Andy teed up, it's an important one, but I think it's important to maybe start first with a little bit of background on what's been going on in energy in Ohio, because it really sets the context for why we're having the conversation today about this case and dealing with this at the commission. So there's been several large significant movements in energy policy in the U.S. over the last few years that lead us to the point where we are today. One of those is, as we've seen over the last 20, 30 years, a significant focus on improving the quality of the environment and being responsible to the environment when we produce electricity. And a continuous focus on wanting to do better at that and being more responsible with our planet and trying to find ways to ensure that our future is going to be as clean and as bright as our past has been. So we've seen policies at both the federal level and at the state level continuously evolve and getting to a point where we are today, there's some significant restrictions and limitations on the kind of electric generation we can have as a country and as a state. And it's important to recognize that we got here over a long period of time, and the reason why we started with a lot of the electric generation in the state was based on the abundance of natural resources that were in each of the regions that generated electricity. For Ohio, that was coal primarily. We had a lot of access to low-cost coal, and from that cheap electricity came a very strong industrial manufacturing base that we've enjoyed here in this part of the country for many years. So this evolution of moving away from coal and moving away from fossil fuels has a pretty significant effect to regions like ours. And we need to put that in context because that's part of the backdrop for this conversation that we're having around this case at the PUCO. Another thing that has gone on here locally in Ohio, back about 15 years ago, the state of Ohio made a decision that they wanted to deregulate the generation sale of electricity. And what that meant back then was, well, there was the potential for new folks to come in and to market and sell power to customers here in the state of Ohio. But at that point in time, market prices were such that there wasn't a very significant competitive advantage in marketers doing so. And so we saw a very slow evolution or change towards that deregulation. And then about 8 years ago, some pretty significant events started to happen. We saw a significant slowdown in the economy. We saw a significant increase in the availability of cheap natural gas because of techniques like fracking. And all of a sudden, that market equation of what competitors could come into this market with changed significantly from when Ohio first originally made the decision to deregulate. So now we have a state that's going through this process of fully deregulating, and the utility companies going through that with them. And that also is a backdrop for what's happening at the PUCO today. And then the last thing I'd say is that the state of Ohio has been figuring out what they want to do with renewables and energy efficiency programs. And that also is an important part of the conversation because it ties into the other two as well. So given all of those circumstances, we're now at a junction where we're trying to figure out how to make a transition from where we are today at this point in time to the future. And that future will have much less reliance on fossil fuels. It'll have much more use of renewable energy. It'll utilize natural gas as a significant source of baseload generation. And technology is going to change the way we interact with our customers and the way we manage energy. So what we are putting forth is a plan that Andy described very simply, but I think very accurately, that is essentially a bridge for the next 8 years to help us make that transition in a responsible way. We don't want to see significant rate increases or volatility for our customers during this transition. We don't want to see reliability of the grid be impacted as a result of this. And we want to make sure that the local economies here in Ohio that are using and have been benefiting from these power plants for the last 100 years continue to see that benefit for as long as it's reasonable for them to do so and figure out how to make a transition to some other economy in the short term. So I'll stop there and just say that kind of sets up the issue, Andy, the way we're looking at it, trying to have a responsible transition to that future, and we hope that we can have a good dialogue around what that means.
Great, thank you very much. Sam, any opening remarks in reaction to what Pablo just set up?
Well, I've had the wonderful experience, wonderful in quotes, of actually going through transitions in natural gas, communications, and electricity industry. All of those transitions were inspired by something that nobody really talks about, but nobody contests either. You had a combination of court decisions or legislative decisions that looked at the structure of the incumbent industry and viewed that structure as being anti-competitive, which is code for saying that the structure of the industry was getting in the way of innovation, better service, lower prices. So this discussion about deregulation and competition, I think, misses fundamentally what restructuring, not deregulation, was all about. If you look at the literature, and there's lots of it in this area, if you look academically at the textbooks that exist in this area, you will quickly read that the purpose of regulation is to simulate the forces that would exist in a competitive market. So if regulation and competition are functioning properly, if they're functioning to serve the public interest, each is a tool, then there really shouldn't be that much difference. I would also say that we have gotten through much more difficult issues. We had, and got through them well. We had dramatic natural gas supply shortages when I started my career. The technical staff at the PUCO, Ohio was curtailing 50% of flowing gas supply, not just peak days. It was flowing gas supply. We were closing down schools. We were closing down colleges. Manufacturers couldn't operate. We were dealing with Arab oil embargo. We were dealing with wildcat coal strikes. And while people talk about the polar vortex, I actually lived through blizzards. So, you know, we had double-digit inflation, much more difficult circumstances that we have right now. The problems that we are dealing with right now are more a function of what I'll call real-world events, overcoming expectations about the way the world was really going to be. Nobody projected that we'd be awash in natural gas and it would be cheap and we'd have these new technologies, whether it's solar, wind, or natural gas fired generation. So a lot of business models are very challenged by fundamental forces. And what's going on over at the PUCO is simply a reflection that stakeholders try to use the regulatory process to improve what might not otherwise be achievable based upon fundamental merits. So we'll get through it. I think people need to chill, spend less time running TV ads and more time focusing on how we get through this period in a sensible way, responsible to the public interest.
All right, moving down the table to Ned, why don't you introduce yourself, but can you also touch on the idea of that Sam brought up about when you have some restructuring going on, when certain elements, like Pablo brought up in 2008, there's a recession and then natural gas is booming. What happens when you want to what happens when you want to change how that restructuring was taking place? So why don't you introduce yourself and touch on those issues?
Well, thank you, Andy. This is a particularly complicated issue because it's just not one market. When we're thinking about energy, we have to realize that first there's a market for the generation of electricity. That's a market that the state of Ohio has been moving to deregulate and put on more of a competitive footing. And it's a market that doesn't stop at the Ohio's borders. Electrons, folks, don't have passports. And so we're part of a 13-state system, and that's really where we have to worry about the impacts of what happens to Ohio and impacts outside of Ohio across that system. The other thing that we have to realize is the issue about reliability is not an Ohio issue. It's a system-wide issue across the 13 states. It really doesn't belong with PUCO anymore. It should belong with the federal FERC, the Federal Electric Regulatory Commission, and the grid operators. In order to do this right, we have to get to the right scale of the right market. The second market that is in play here is the transmission market. And the transmission market is how you get the electrons from where they're produced to the point at which they're being distributed. And the transmission market, that is still a natural monopoly. I expect it to be disrupted sometime in the next 10 to 20 years, but we still have to regulate it like a natural monopoly. And then the last market, separate still, is the distribution market, which is where the electricity goes or the power goes from the lines to your house or to your factory or to your office. That also has to remain regulated because it remains a natural monopoly. But what an economist really pays attention to, first is what's the goal, which is the lowest cost delivered to the customer. The second thing an economist wants to do is make certain that you don't re-monopolize activities that were deregulated and you don't pre-monopolize new sources that can compete against it. So part of what we have to straighten in Ohio is what is the right areas for regulation for our state regulators, what belongs at the national level, and also realize that we've got a challenge. The challenge is we're in the middle of the pack when it comes to our cost for electricity. Since we started down deregulating the generating markets, our rate of increase has been among the highest of the deregulated states, but below that of the monopoly states. And the other thing that we have to realize is that what is being bandied about as consumer choice on the distribution level is hiding the fog of remonopolization at the generating level. So it's very easy to mix our terms to confuse the policy debate and have the wrong conversation. So I look at all this as like watching a magician. There's lots of activity in the magician's hand, and that's to distract you from where the real stuff's taking place where the hand's quiet. So it's complicated, it's important, and at the end of the day, it works against the best interest of consumers to remonopolize the generating market.
All right, Gene, let's go to you, and feel free to give the perspective of cost and what the consumers are taking on as far as costs go.
Okay. Well, a couple of things. I became chair of the Consumers Council Governing Board in 2012. A couple of relevant things for you guys to know is that by statute, we can only make $900 a year at this. I was asked earlier for my business card and where my offices are located. We do not have an office, okay? This is essentially a volunteer board. And we were having trouble getting quorum. So I made two commitments to my board members when they made me chair. One, I will make all board meetings interesting. I will make all board meetings relevant. We spent all of 2015 looking at one issue, which was the state of the electrical system in Ohio. What we found was that we issued a report, and the reason we're here is because the Dispatch did a very nice editorial based upon that report. And what it said is that, just talking about the data, of the states in America, 32 states have cheaper electricity than what we do. Now, some of them you can understand, Idaho, state of Washington, high amount of hydroelectric power where we have paid for that power 80 years ago. Now we're just reaping the benefits of that. It's been a long time motorized. The other thing that we found is, by the way, if you look at other states like Iowa, it's still cheaper electricity than what we have, but people will also have been using this renewable energy industry as a whipping boy, say, oh, your rates are high in Ohio because of renewable energy. Well, about a third of the energy produced in Iowa comes from renewable sources, okay? It's 11% in Colorado and 17% in North Dakota. And by the way, George Carlin was right. I don't know why we have two Dakotas, North and South. I never have understood that. But
it's because the city of Grand Forks, North Dakota, gave me a key to their city. South Dakota won't associate with them anymore.
There we go. Now I understand. Which tells you Ned was there when the two states were formed.
I am a practicing old fart. Yes.
Yeah. So when you look at that, so that's not the answer. Okay, you look at the states have a very similar fuel mix to what we do. Better fuel mixes than what we do. Louisiana, West Virginia, they're much cheaper than what we are. So still, why are we so expensive? You look at the states that have deregulated, of all the states that have deregulated, and how you define deregulation is kind of like how you define my diet too some days. But we have by far and away in Ohio the highest, fastest rate of increase of those states that have deregulated. So in other words, there's something horribly wrong here in Ohio. So we sat down, I channeled what all the board members had been thinking, what their questions had been, how they've been responding to the various meetings. We came up with a report. The report said, basically the title of it is, Everyone is Unhappy. Because nobody in Ohio, or indeed much of North America, is currently happy with the state of our electrical system. If you talk to the moneyed interests out of Wall Street, Morningstar Investments, you read Forbes magazine, the Wall Street Journal, what you come across there is that they are profoundly worried for the investor-owned utilities to adapt to a new and rapidly changing business model. and they're forecasting that many of them are going to go bankrupt. This scares us. This basically is why you're seeing this change in the business model. You're basically engaged in rent seeking here with power purchase agreements and things like that. The thing is that moving forward, how do we protect, simultaneously, how do we protect the consumer and not have the IOUs go bankrupt in the middle of the night? So what we proposed in there, and I agree, not the best solution, but we asked for a task force. Because the main thing we're asking for here is for people to recognize there's a problem. Sure.
Do you have, well, so I want to know, Pablo, what Gene's talking about, are you seeing that? Are AEP customers seeing this rate of increase more than other deregulated states?
So, yeah, I'd like to comment on that. And it's a great, I had a chance to read the report that the OCC published, and while there are definitely a lot of folks, I think, unhappy, I think mostly the folks unhappy are those that are confused as to what's actually going on. And there's a lot of confusion as to what has been actually transpiring in the energy markets here. There, on everybody's tables, there is a couple of handouts or little PowerPoints that you can look at, and if you want to share, there's maybe 3 or 4 per table. And it has the chart from Gene's report that he referenced. And the very first page, if you look at it, it has that list that shows that Ohio is the 33rd, ranked 33rd in terms of cost in relation to other states. And that you know, of course, raises questions, and I started to look into that a little bit. And so I turn you then to the next page, and it shows, well, where has Ohio ranked in relation to all the other states for the last 25 years? And when you take a look at that, 25 years ago, we were ranked about 33rd. This was when we were fully regulated, when we were utilizing the lowest cost energy available for the state of Ohio, as presumably every other state is too. And over the course of the next 25 years, we stayed right around 33rd, 35th. But when we actually saw that big boom in terms of the price of natural gas going up during the 2000s, many of you may have remembered that natural gas spiked up almost as high as $14 compared to it's about $2 today. That those customers in Ohio got a huge benefit by the fact that we had this low-cost fleet of generation. And during those 10 years, our relative cost to other states dropped down to the mid-20s. So now we're back to about where we were 25 years ago, still about 33rd compared to everyone else. And it's not anything horrible or shocking that's been going on. What's happened in terms of why rates have been going up over the last 5 to 10 years? Well, actually, you know, they've been going up systematically because there's been a lot of investment in the state of Ohio infrastructure. We talked about cleaning up generation plants. We talked about investing in the infrastructure. Well, that's caused rates to go up. We've also made decisions with the regulated body to defer certain costs from being collected. And those deferrals are reflected in increases that are now being paid. It's kind of like charging something on a credit card and then having to pay for it later. And when you look at those costs, I think Gene referenced, you know, the fact that our costs have gone up more than any other deregulated state. So if you look at page 3 of this, you're going to see where he's referring to that. This is from his report, where it shows Ohio has the highest rate of change as compared to all the other restructured changes, all the other restructured states. So I wanted to say, okay, well, how are we actually relative to them in actual rates? Well, look at page 5. The dark red line is Ohio. We're among the lowest energy cost of all the restructured states. So it really depends on the context of how you look at this information. Yeah, we've seen some increases in recent years, but those increases are because we've been investing heavily to try to keep these coal plants running for the benefit of customers, and we've seen a lot of these deferrals take place. But relative to all the other restructured states, we're among the cheapest.
And Sam, did you have a thought there?
Yeah, I think Pablo's directionally correct here. I think that there's a lot of confusion about this topic, but I want to pick up on something that Ned said. He talked about 3 different markets in the electric sector, which, as I said before, was found to be anti-competitive, which is the reason why we're restructuring. But if you focus on electricity, you need to remember that electricity is a secondary energy form. It's not a primary energy form. We have no electricity without some other energy form being behind the production of electricity. It's natural gas, nuclear. So when people talk about the reliability of the grid is only as reliable as the primary energy form and the availability of the primary energy form that we use, and there are many, that we use to produce electricity. So what's happening right now in the coal sector? Almost every major coal producer is either in bankruptcy or headed there. The market cap, the value of a company as measured by the stock price for coal companies has gone down by tens of billions of dollars in a relatively short period of time. Coal is a primary energy source. Okay. So natural gas, thankfully, about 66% of Ohioans heat with natural gas. They've had a huge windfall in terms of their total delivered cost of energy as a result of the good fortune of technological innovation and an abundant form of energy within shale formations, both oil and gas. So we are not going to have a reliable electric grid if we don't have coal in play. It's not physically possible.
But what's going to happen? Is coal eventually going to phase out? Is there a day where coal is just not going to be around, and then what's going to happen with reliability then?
So, it wasn't that long ago that we all thought that natural gas was going to phase out. It wasn't that long ago. And I will tell you that the future is, people have different visions about what the future holds. If coal is a primary energy form, people are going to figure out a way to capture the value, the energy value from that very significant, hugely important energy form and turn it into productive use. It may require new technology, but eventually it's going to happen, much the way we have found out a good way to harvest the energy that is resident within the shale formation. And if we close off the way we think about reliability in ways that remove coal from the picture, what is it that we rely on? We're going to turn to nuclear, another primary energy form. The environmental groups go crazy. You know, we have in court for 10 years just to get a permit. Is it natural gas? Sierra Club alone is filing 3 lawsuits a week. Many of them are directed at stopping fracking. So, you know, the notion here that somehow the debate that's over to the PUCO is going to have much to do with reliability ignores the fact that electricity is a secondary energy form, and we better be paying attention to making sure we have abundant primary energy forms that we can draw upon and machines that can use those energy forms if you are seeking a reliability outcome.
I want to make sure.
I
Go ahead.
agree partially with Sam. Not surprising, we actually have a history of partial agreement.
Usually when I cross-examine you.
No, you start disagreeing, and then you believe me when I get done. Okay, the issue we've got is Sam's right. We are not, this debate isn't really a debate for a massive shift away from coal. It's not going to happen. But the debate should be one about opening up the generating markets and keeping the generating markets open to the lowest cost source of fuel that will provide the best price to customers, and as a byproduct of this, which happens to be natural gas, and as a byproduct of it, natural gas produces about half the CO2 as coal does.
Does this plan go against what you're saying? If the PUCO were to approve this plan, does it go against opening up the markets, keeping the markets?
Yeah, absolutely. If the PPAs are approved, I think of them as an economic virus. Because the way the PPA is really structured, there's some legalism about it, and there's some Rube Goldberg accounting behind it. So let's kind of get down to what the PPA really is. The PPA is that the generating divisions of the utilities will sell their power to their distribution companies. The distribution companies then sell their power into the grid. If that sale generates a loss, then all users of electricity, even if they aren't a retail customer of the utility, will make up the loss. And if, under some scenarios, which I don't believe, they make a profit, the customer will then get a credit. This will go on for 8 years. Consumers Council says that this scheme, just for First Energy and for AEP, will cost consumers $5.5 billion across both of them. The utilities say, no, under our forecast consumers are going to come 1.3 billion to the good. Now, I don't see where that comes from, but let's look at the virus. What it really does is it takes the 6 million megawatts of power that are protected by the PPAs and says 6 million megawatts of Ohio demand has to be serviced indirectly by keeping these plants going. What these are, those plants that can't sell into the capacity market, and the reason why the utilities are doing this is because they are not making money. There are other plants that are making money. So if you draw a fence around the Ohio plants and said, thou shalt not go out of business, which is what we're doing, it means that some other non-loss making plant is going to hit the losses that are being transferred from Ohio elsewhere. It'll be elsewhere in the grid. So that is one way in which the wholesale price of electricity is going to go up for everybody, no matter what degree of competition is on the distribution level. Here's where the virus really goes bad. Those new loss-making plants are going to go to their legislatures and say, Ohio utilities have gone and are hiding underneath the skirts of the PUCO. They can't compete with us.
Other
I'm
states?
almost done.
Are you saying other states would say
Yeah,
this?
up to other states.
Okay.
And then you're going to see the gradual, piecemeal, balkanized re-regulation of the generating market, which will increase prices for everybody. How will this hurt reliability? It will hurt reliability because the new competitive producers of natural gas-fired electricity are going to say, if my competitor can't go out of business, why am I going to go into a market where demand is stagnating or falling? Mm-hmm. So that means the newest, most competitive, cleanest forms of electrical generation won't enter the marketplace and will end up with a less reliable system.
I want to go to Gene for a quick comment, but then I want to come back to Pablo because there's a lot that's been said here. So Gene, go ahead.
Please, somebody insult me. Somebody insult consumers. Actually, what I'd like you all to do when you go home from here is just Google the phrase death spiral and Wall Street Journal. It was the first time it was mentioned that the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, may be facing a death spiral due to some of the reasons that basically ask yourself why, what you just heard from Ned, why are they wanting to do this? It's because according to a whole lot of the people at the financial markets on Wall Street, their business model is starting to collapse. And so the question is this true? I don't know. Is this false? I don't know. But if it is true, how do we manage this in Ohio so that the consumer is not damaged?
So we'll come back to Pablo to feel free to respond to a lot of the things that's been said, but I just want to throw it out there. In a few minutes, we're going to move on to the audience questions. So get those questions ready. Pablo, we heard the word virus. We heard the word downward spiral or death spiral. So how apocalyptic is this?
I'm really freaking out right now, Andy. I'm freaking out. I'm kind of figure out where I'm going to be working next year. I'll have to answer maybe Gene's point first. The rumor of the demise of the electric utility business is significantly over-exaggerated. I think Mark Twain had a similar quote. It's false. There is not a demise. To the point that Sam brought up, power and the distribution of power is still going to be a requirement, even with local distributed generation. The grid is actually going to be enabling a lot of distributed generation to be successful. So the utility integrated regulated business and supply sources is not imminently dying. To Professor Hill's points, I don't partially agree with any of them. He's completely wrong on all of them, actually. The way he described it's a little simpler, I guess, because I don't have to mince, what I think is right, what's wrong. It's all wrong. It's completely wrong. Fundamentally, if this PPA ends up having a charge to you as a customer, what that means is that your electric costs have gone down substantially. Exactly, he described it that if market prices are very low, that means that you are paying very little for your generation costs. And the portion of your bill that this PPA represents roughly is about 1/3 of your generation costs. So that means 2/3 of your generation bill is based on just what the market price is. So if it's very, very low, that means you're paying less for your bill. So the best case scenario out of this is you see a charge in this PPA rider because that means you're paying less for your electricity bill. Now, if he's saying that natural gas prices will be cheap for the rest of our lives, I think he's promising a forecast or a skill set that nobody can really commit to. So what it also does is that if prices happen to go up, and that means the majority of your costs now are going up, this rider will give you a credit and will have to help to offset those increases. It basically moves in the opposite of the market price. It's a hedge. It works like a hedge, but it doesn't drive the cost. So them saying that, it's going to increase your bills, it's not going to increase your bills. Your bills will be going down, actually. And so that's a big misnomer. In the long run, absolutely. So if prices go up, you will pay more for electricity, but this rider will help keep it down. If prices stay low and go down further, you'll pay less, but this will help to ensure that we can transition to this future energy economy without having these coal plants shut down. And while Professor Hill may not mind if they shut down, I would bet that the thousands of employees and people who rely on these plants across Ohio and the economies that depend on them probably do have a concern about these plants shutting down quickly, and they don't care if generating plants are built in the other parts of PJM. They'd like those plants running here in Ohio.
And Sam, what Pablo just said, if they go up, then the rider will keep it down. If they go down, the rider will keep that. It sort of sounds like some sort of regulation in place. Do you see?
It is regulation, and what again is lost in the conversation, and Dr. Hill's description of the electric grid is the fact that there is going to be a PPA, one way or the other. It's a question of who is supplying the electricity and what the price is.
What do you mean by that?
Pablo's company is a distribution utility. They have to buy generation from somebody to satisfy the requirements of ultimate customers. Pablo's company, unique to every other so-called competitor, is solely and uniquely responsible for being the default supplier. So if things go to, excuse my language, hell, Pablo's company is the one that's has first responder responsibility in order to make sure that the lights stay on. Okay, that is not a competitive market. In a competitive market, if you look at the attributes of competitive market, you have free entry and free exit. If Pablo's company did not want to serve one of you for whatever reason, they would have the ability to basically say, we're not going to serve you. That is not the condition we have in the electric industry. In the wholesale market, called a market, highly regulated. The capacity price that's wholesale determined is produced by a formula that is so maze-dominated that I defy anybody to predict what the capacity price is going to be in 3 years from now, let alone 10 years from now. In the case of the energy piece, it is highly regulated. In the wholesale market, generating suppliers are not paid the price that they offer. They are paid through what is something that is called a uniform clearing price model. That uniform clearing price model compensates every generator for energy, which is the bulk of the revenue in the electric market, compensates everybody for energy based upon the highest price bid by the last generating unit selected.
A bunch of people come into, and then whoever ends up at the very top.
In a competitive market, if you have 3 people that come and bid to paint the inside of your house, and you pick the one with the lowest bid, that's what you pay. You don't pay the bid of the highest entity that offered to paint your house. So the notion here that we have this competitive construct, that it's perfectly formed and it's dynamically efficient, is just totally at odds with anything that exists in reality. And we can't put down the rhetoric long enough to recognize that, acknowledge it, and figure out how we need to improve it. I need to say one thing here. We've got an investor-owned utility to my right, your left. There are other types of utilities in Ohio. Co-ops, municipal utilities. We have joined with those other types of utilities, and at times joined with the investor-owned utilities, to urge federal regulators to make significant improvements in the structure of the wholesale market to address many of the problems that lead to the tensions that show up at the PUCO. Our problem today is more a function of a lack of an appropriate institutional structure that can take the responsibility that resides with states and take the responsibility that resides with the federal government and get coordinated performance across those jurisdictional lines so that we can make progress on reliability and price objectives. All real important stuff. It's not being talked about in the PPA fight. The PPA fight will be resolved, won't do anything to solve these problems. So I would once again urge, rather than get mad and filing reports, let's sit down, create a list, figure out how we go back about solving the problems.
All right, thank you. All right, it's the Columbus Metropolitan Club's tradition to take audience questions. So please state your name, ask your question, and we thank you for advance for not making long editorial comments. Let's proceed with the first question.
Yeah, my name's Jane Scott. I'm not smart enough in this topic to make any kind of editorial comment. I do have a question, though. It seems to me that in other industries, decisions have been made that always look to the lowest price on benefit of the consumer. But I like my electricity to be on at night when I turn this switch on. So how do we get to a fair price for the consumer so we can make sure we have reliable energy and a fair business model for the utilities, whether they're co-ops or investor-owned or municipalities, that we can know that they're going to be there in the next 15 or 20 years? How do we get there?
Let's
First,
go to Ned.
there are two parts, I think, that would make a responsible answer. The first is the electric system as we have right now, it's been demonstrated by the actions of the market to be highly reliable. PJM, which operates the grid, looks for a 15% margin in their capacity auctions, and the capacity margin has been coming in at almost 20%. And if I look at my colleagues who have taught regulation in the past, they say 12% should be the right margin. Is that right, Doug? Okay. So we actually have a situation there may actually be too much capacity in the market. And what markets do is they ration the low producers out. Sam is absolutely right. Every distribution company executes PPAs. They're long-term contracts. That's their base load. But the difference in the PPAs being negotiated before us is that if the company makes the wrong bet, every electricity user in the footprint has to pay, and the estimates that I believe is that that's going to be $5.5 billion extra. I keep on thinking billion may be a big number. I can't get there on my fingers and toes.
Pablo, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, again, those numbers are completely wrong, and we've proven that in our discussions at the PUCO, so I won't go into that here.
We're about ready for Saturday Night Live.
But
we see projections one way or another. We
Yeah.
see all sorts of numbers out there. How are we supposed to know which numbers are the numbers to trust?
Well, look at your bill. How about you look at your bill? I think that's the best way to trust the numbers, because the bill doesn't lie.
But the response has nothing to do with the question. The question was asked, I understand how people might be motivated to get the lowest price. I'm interested in getting something that's reasonable, predictable, stable, something that I can count on over a period of time. And again, nobody disagrees with that. The art, however, is trying to put some meat on what those words actually mean. What is a fair price? The whole federal system works off of three words. The standard for federal regulation and price control is just and reasonable. It's a concept. So we've, throughout history, whether we're talking about communications, gas, or electricity, we've struggled, and we should struggle, to find the right balance.
Want to jump in here too?
Yeah, Pablo brought up your bill. If you go to the Consumers Council webpage, you'll see our report. In it, you'll see this graph, which shows that if you live in the footprint here for AEP Ohio, your electric bill is about a third higher than the other AEP entities in the states. If you look at the source for this is AEP. If you look at the AEP's return on equity for the Ohio region, once again, it's a complete outlier. So the question is, why are your electric rates in this state too high? They've been too high for a quarter century. What is going on here? And are you happy with this?
if somebody wants to jump in for just a really quick response, but I want to get to the next question too.
Because it's real important. If you look at the typical residential customer in Columbus using 1,000 kilowatt hours a month is paying about $35 bucks a month, somewhere around there. And how many of you realize what percentage of that total bill has nothing to do with electric service? All right. We have things like the Universal Service Fund, which in 2016 will reach funding, statewide funding, $500 million. We have kilowatt hour tax. We have state mandates. State mandate alone for a typical residential customer is about $5 a month. All of it's hidden in your electric bill. So if the Office of Consumers Counsel wants to get a better grip on what's causing electric bills in Ohio to be higher than other states, perhaps we ought to take a look at all those things that everybody seems to like when they're over at the General Assembly, don't have anything to do really with providing reliable electric service, and figure out where we can do better on those components. And I suggest there are lots of opportunity there.
Okay, next question.
My name is Werner Niehaus. I have an all-electric home, and my prices in March 2014 for generation have been 4.65 cents. In 2016, this month, was 5.71%. So that is an increase of 22.7%. You can find arguments for it, but my distribution charges went from 2.6 cents in 2014 to 4.09 cents in 2016, which is an increase of 56%. So that's pretty harsh increase for a residential home. It means as well it will devalue the home as well.
Distribution charges, I think that's the...
To explain a little bit, so what Sam was referring to, all of those charges fall under distribution charges. So it's not only those things that have nothing to do with the production of electricity, but it's also some things that I mentioned earlier, deferrals. So decisions were made 5, 8 years ago to defer cost from being collected from our customers at the time that they were incurred to a later time. Those deferrals have stacked up and are now being collected through the distribution charge. So you're paying in that distribution charge for the deferral of fuel costs, for the deferral of infrastructure investments in distribution made 10 years ago, for transition charges due to competition deregulation. All of those deferrals are stacked up in the distribution and have nothing to do with the fundamental cost of providing distribution service. It's one of the largest reasons why that has increased. Your generation charge, your current generation charge, is 100% based on the price in the market. So if that price has gone up, it's because the market price of generation is higher than it was before. Even though you may not be shopping with a competitive supplier, as if you stay with AEP Ohio, we still go out to the market and buy the generation for you and just pass the cost to you. So 100% of your generation charges today are based on whatever the market price is.
Gene, real quick, and then we'll go to the next question.
In short, your frustration is partly what's fueling politically the rise of both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, because people are simply not happy with the status quo. What you've heard up here is the ruling elite, the oligarchy, us, the status quo, okay, saying this is a lot of long talk about things. Bobby and Betty Buckeye are not happy. And the question is whether or not the political system is going to be able to respond adequately to your concerns. As of right now, I don't think so. That's why I'm so concerned.
All right, next question.
Hello, my name is Daniel Johnson. I'm an executive consultant with Ambit Energy based out of Dallas. I just moved to Columbus into a townhome that's part of a complex. My last bill was 17 cents a kilowatt. My company offers that same kilowatt charge of 5.7 cents currently, with the option to the customer to get that supply portion for free. My question is, how will legislation or re-regulation be justified that increases costs for the consumer when competition and technology can ultimately solve these issues, especially when every company that is part of our electric generation system and supply system operates on the profit motive?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Are you supplied by the complex, or are you directly purchasing
The
electricity?
complex, unfortunately for me, has a 10-year lock-in contract
Well,
that
that's
I
why
don't
you're
have
paying
the right.
17 cents. That's why you're paying 17 cents. You should take your concerns to your association.
I guess the question is, though, as a consumer, and I look at the options of 17 to 5, when the issue of legislation comes up, how is the consumer going to act to justify such legislation if the bottom line is their prices go up?
Well, sir, your electricity price is being dictated by the complex, not by competitive forces. You're captive. You're captive to the price that your complex is charging you, not a competitive supplier.
I understand that.
In Central Ohio, you want to go contact Representative Mike Duffy, who has legislation dealing with this.
I guess the ultimate point is for the consumer. How is the consumer going to react to legislation or regulation that's ultimately going to up their pricing when technology and competition can ultimately solve this?
My feeling is that if we end up protecting the generation market from competition, and $5.5 billion of costs over the next 8 years end up going directly to consumers and they can identify it on their bills, we should expect pitchforks and burning torches. And the reputation of those in the PUCO that did this is going to really depend on what the outcome of this experiment is.
Thank you.
I would just say that the comment that Dr. Hill just made is equally applicable to the massive subsidies that are being directed to wind, solar, and all these other things that people seem to feel quite good about, that makes them happy, because they have the green color. And oh, by the way, these technologies are intermittent producers and are not capable as a physical matter of satisfying our reliability objectives. So again, you look statewide at what we're throwing at wind and solar through the mandates, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We have similar mandates directed at energy efficiency and peak demand reduction, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We have a mandate to provide very understandable bill payment assistance to the most vulnerable in our society, $500 million a year. All these things end up affecting what is in your bill. And so, you know, we are challenged by all of them to be responsible in the direction that the lady, first questioner, asked about.
Just real quick to respond to the one aspect that you asked about, you know, where are we headed with strategy with legislation. You know, we're advocating very strongly for support for investment in technology that's going to enable customers to be much more engaged in the usage of their energy. Smart grids, the platform for smart grids, and what that enables is the first step in being able to really have a granular understanding of what a consumer's patterns are and being able to help them make better choices in how they want to use energy. So we're strongly advocating at the legislature and at the PUC for support to enable, to put that technology kind of road out there. And then on that is going to be the opportunity for a lot of interesting technology investments that you all are going to be able to use to help manage energy. So we're very supportive of that.
And we talked about a lot of very complex issues here. Just while I have you, one last question very simply, because we see it everywhere right now. Is this plan a bailout? Let's just go down the line. Is this plan a coal plant bailout?
It really isn't, Andy. This is not a bailout. These are great plants. They've been running for decades. They've been serving the customers very well. They're going to continue to serve them well, and they're going to help manage this transition to this new energy future that we've been describing. It is absolutely not a bailout.
Sam?
Well, in the wholesale market structure, PJM has a reliability must-run contract, and it's designed to keep certain generators operating where they have reliability significance. Is that a bailout or something that's responsive to a larger purpose? I think the math here really depends upon your assumptions on what natural gas supply prices are going to be over an extended period of time and what the electric market is going to do. Everybody's wrong. Where we are right now is that PUCO, if it approves the PPA, it will also be monitoring the performance of that mechanism over time to test the performance of that mechanism relative to the claims that everybody is making. Oh, by the way, the opponents of the PPA, Dynegy, Exelon, have also filed their own PPA. So again, and they're pursuing it.
Okay.
So we're going to have a PPA. It's a question of what it looks like, what the prices are, and then hopefully the PUCO does what it's supposed to do to make sure that it functions in the public interest to provide a balanced outcome.
Ned?
Oh, it's hard to pass an Economics 101 course. It's a bailout. I mean, it's that simple. What Sam's point about the PPA, this is the magician's trick going again. Yes, there will be PPAs. The difference in this bill is it is a PPA that you can't avoid, non-bypassable. Okay. Everybody pays, if you're an electric user, to keep non-competitive plants in the marketplace, which will end up deterring new, more competitive plants from entering the marketplace.
Okay.
So, absolutely. We paid $6.9 billion from 1999 to 2005 to deal with stranded assets, and that was just First Energy. AEP requested almost $1 billion. I believe they got $600 million to deal with stranded assets. Okay. Throughout the entire time period, from 2005 on, we've been dealing with a number of costs, and Sam's absolutely right. 21% of your electric bill is non-bypassable riders to deal with the inefficiency. And now we are being asked for another $5.5 billion.
Okay.
It's a bailout.
All right, we got Gene, real quick. Is it a bailout?
Depends on where you sit. If you're a small business, it's probably going to be painful for you. If you are mostly your manufacturers in Ohio, it's going to be painful for you. If you're Bobby and Betty Buckeye, it'll be painful for you. If you are certain large industries that can create your own particular carve-outs in it, not that painful. You can do your side deals. If you're the large industrial investor-owned utilities, pretty sweet. If you're the stockholders, pretty sweet. Okay. If you're on Wall Street, still suspect.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Well, it's going to have to be lights out on the forum, but we know the debate will continue. Thank you so much for being here. Let's thank our sponsors, American Electric Power, Columbia Gas of Ohio, and OSU's Office of Energy and Environment. Thank you to our speakers, Gene Krebs, Pablo Vegas, Ned Hill, Sam Randazzo, and Andy Chow. Enjoy the week.